The Neighborhood Yowler from Grommel and Co. Warning. The following story contains depictions of violence against pets. The Neighborhood Yowler from Gromlinko. The place I grew up was not exciting. Just one of those suburbs north of Toronto that developers threw up in the 90s. Cookie-cutter houses with identical floor plans. Tons of young trees that hadn't grown much yet. And these narrow strips of forest they left between subdivisions to make people feel like they were living close to nature. My family moved there in 2004 when I was in grade 6. And by grade 8, I knew every kid on our street, every shortcut through the woods, and every house where the owners would yell at you for cutting across the lawn. What I'm about to tell you happened during those junior high years, mostly in 2006 and 2007. I've never really talked much about it because honestly, I'm not sure what to tell people. Whenever my friends bring up ghost stories or scary campfire stories and the like, it's just one of those stories that sounds cool to tell people, but you don't know how to tell it. So, finally today, I'm sitting down and I'm doing just that. It sounds crazy when you hear it, but this did happen. And sometimes when I'm back visiting my parents and I hear a sound in the night, I remember everything. I'll begin by saying the kids in the neighborhood called it the Yowler. Not very creative, but when you're 13, you name things for what they do. And this thing yelled. The first time I heard it was maybe 2 months after we moved in. It was late in the spring when you'd open windows to catch the breeze. I was lying in bed reading some fantasy novel with dragons on the cover when the sound cut through the night. Long and drawn out like a cat in heat, but deeper and much, much bigger. It started from somewhere behind the Patel's house, about 3 doors down. It went on for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. Then it started up again from behind the Moore's place next door to them. I recall going to my window that night and looking out. Other kids were doing the same. I could see faces and windows up and down the street. The sound moved again to another house, then another, always seeming to appear in the backyards where the forest started, always moving. My dad at the time was still up watching the Leafs game. When I went downstairs, he shrugged. Some kind of fox or something. They make weird noises, he said. But to me, it didn't sound like a fox. I was sure I'd heard a fox before at our old place, and it didn't sound the same. The howling became a thing that just happened sometimes. You might hear it 3 nights in a row, or you might hear nothing for weeks. Parents got used to bringing their kids inside whenever it would start. Even heard one of my friend's moms say, "Come on in. The year's out." Like it was just some other suburban hazard, like a speeding car or that one house that never mowed their lawn. Then there was the night in August when the yowling stopped early. Usually when it came, it would go on for an hour or more, moving from yard to yard in a slow circuit. But that night, it just cut off abruptly during a yow after only a few minutes. It just stopped mid-yow behind someone's house. Someone right next door to us. The next morning, the lady who lived there found her dog, who was named Schnitzel. I need to explain about Schnitzel because it matters. He was this little schnauzer about 15 pounds gray and white. He barked at everything, but was usually scared of his own shadow. His owners loved him like a child. He even had a little doghouse in the backyard, even though he slept inside. They bought him special organic food, which I'd seen them bring in once. Apparently, the whole works. Well, the lady's scream woke up half the street. My mom ran over in her house coat and told me to stay inside, but of course I followed. I wish I hadn't. Schnitzel was in his doghouse, but he didn't look like Schnitzel anymore. You know when you get fried chicken and you try to pull all the meat off the bone? How it never comes off clean. There's always bits stuck and the bones are all exposed but still connected. That's what Schnitzel looked like something had tried to deb-one him by hand. His fur was mostly there, matted with blood, but underneath everything had been pulled apart and twisted. His little head was turned completely backward. His owner was hysterical. The husband came out, took one look, and puked in the petunias. My mom grabbed me and hauled me back home. But the image I saw that day had already been burned into my mind. The adults had a meeting that night, and from what I gathered they talked about coyotes, maybe a rabid raccoon, maybe a sick person. Some people wanted to call the police, and others said animal control. In the end, they did both to be sure. The cops came, took reports, said to keep pets inside. Animal control said the same thing, but nobody had definitive answers. For a while after that, people were careful. Some of the neighbors put up motion lights. One family talked about getting cameras, but never did. Subscription fees, they said. And besides, it was probably just a one-time thing. They thought a disturbed animal or person had probably wandered through, did something terrible to a pet, and died or wandered out. Kids weren't allowed out after dark after that. Parents walked their dogs in groups and carried flashlights, and some even carried hockey sticks. For a while, the neighborhood felt tense, but you can only stay scared for so long. By October, things were mostly back to normal. Kids were playing street hockey until the street lights came on. Dogs were back in backyards. But the yowler came back in November. Just the sound at first. No dead pets yet. People would hear it and bring everyone inside and wait it out. "There goes the yowler," they'd say, almost casual about it. Life went on. I remember exactly when my encounter happened because it was 2 days after my 14th birthday, January 18th, 2007. We'd had a small party, just family and a couple friends, and there were leftovers cluttering the fridge. Our garbage disposal had died months ago, and my mom had this thing about not putting food in our regular trash. Said it would attract animals to the wrong place, so she would rather me bring it to them where it would be unseen, out of the way, and wouldn't make much of a mess. So, she had me dump food scraps over the back fence and into the woods. "The animals will eat it," she said, like we were doing them a favor. It was after dinner, already dark by 6 p.m. because January in Canada is like that. I had a plate of leftover spaghetti that nobody wanted, all congealed and gross. I grabbed a flashlight and headed to the back fence. Our yard backed right onto the forest, just a wooden fence between us and the trees. In the summer, you couldn't see more than a few feet in because of the undergrowth. But in winter with no leaves, you could see deeper into those woods. Not that I was looking. I just wanted to scrape the plate and get back inside where it was warm. I was standing at the fence, tilting the plate to let the spaghetti slide off when I heard something move. Not unusual at first. There was always some sort of small animal out there doing its own thing. But this sounded big. I heard branches moving and something shifting its weight. And then it yowled. I'd heard the yowler dozens of times by then, but always from a distance, and even then, usually muffled by walls and windows. But this happened at most 20 feet away from me, and it sounded like it was coming from above me. The sound hit me like a baseball bat, and every muscle in my body tensed up. My light was shaking because my hand was trembling so hard. I tried to aim it up at the trees, but I didn't see anything but branches and shadows. They stopped, and then I heard something worse. Movement directly overhead. The tree branches were thick there, hanging over our fence, and something was up there shifting around. Then came this sound like a big wet sandbag landing on the ground. Something had fallen from the tree to the forest floor and landed in the snow only 5 feet from where I stood on the other side of the fence, but still way too close. I dropped that plate and ran. Dropped my flashlight, too. Just booked it back to my house. I slammed through the back door hard enough to make my dad angry. He jumped up from his chair and began to curse, but I gasped. "The yowler, it's right out there, right by the fence." My dad grabbed his big mag light and headed out. I watched from the kitchen window as he swept the flashlight beam along the fence line up into the trees. He stood there for a long time, just looking and listening. When he came back in, his face was concerned. "I didn't see anything," he said, "but I heard it moving through the woods. Whatever it was big." And he paused and looked at my mom. There were tracks in the snow. Can't say I've seen them before. We didn't talk about it much after that. My parents didn't want scared kids, and I can't blame them for that. My dad, though, was in a hurry to fix the garbage disposal, which he did that weekend. So I never had to dump food over that fence again. So thank you, year. I guess the next time anyone saw the hour, and I mean actually saw it, was that spring. There was a kid named Tyler who lived across the street and 2 houses down. He was a grade younger than me, kind of a socially awkward kid who was really into astronomy and video games. During a sleepover at his place, a bunch of us were swapping scary stories when someone brought up the hour. Tyler got really quiet and he mumbled, "I've seen it." Probably thought we wouldn't hear, but we did. And we laughed at first, thinking he was joking or trying to make up a story. But Tyler didn't laugh. He looked genuinely uncomfortable, like he wished he hadn't said anything at all. One of the kids said, "Bull crap. Nobody's actually seen it." But Tyler insisted and said, "I did." And he tried to change the subject. But we weren't letting go. 6 13-year-old boys had a sleepover high on pop and chips, and one of them claims to have seen the neighborhood boogeyman. We pestered that kid for 20 minutes before he finally caved. "It was last month," he said. "You know how my room has that door to the balcony?" We knew Tyler's room was on the 2nd floor, and the balcony was right next to where the roof flattened out over the garage. His mom had forbidden him from going on the roof about 100 times, which of course meant he went out there constantly. He liked to sit up there with his Nintendo DS, and he liked watching the stars. I was around there around 11 o'clock, he continued, playing Pokemon, and I heard it start up. The yowling, it was coming from my neighbor's backyard. That particular neighbor lived right next to Tyler. I knew the place. Pretty big house with a nice pool. So, I look over trying to see what's making the noise. And he stopped and swallowed hard. There was something on their house. On it, asked one of the boys. On the back wall on the second story, right under their bedroom window. It was just stuck there. We waited for him to continue, but Tyler looked like he was about to be sick. He went on. At first, I thought it was a decoration, like a Halloween thing they forgot to take down. It was dark and looked furry. Its arms and legs were spread out and clinging to the siding. How could it stick to the wall like that? Someone asked. I don't know. It just did. And then it moved its head. Just turned it to the side like it was looking around. The moon caught its eye and it reflected. Reminded me of a cat's eye. And then it yelled again. The socially awkward part of Tyler came up. He opened his mouth real wide to demonstrate for us, even though no one asked. But we appreciated that. Like that. I could see its mouth open. Could hear the sound coming from it. And I knew that was the yowler right there at my neighbor's house. What did you do? We asked. I crawled back inside as quiet as I could, locked the balcony door, and got in bed, and pulled the covers over my head. It was hard to sleep that night. Well, why didn't you tell anyone after? I asked. Tyler shrugged. When I said anything just now, you laughed at me. That was a good point, and I instantly felt bad about it. We spent the rest of the night taking turns watching out Tyler's window, hoping to see something. But the yowler didn't show up that night. It rarely did when you were expecting it. That's pretty much all I personally remember about the hour from those years. It became this fact of life in our neighborhood. Sometimes you'd hear it, sometimes you wouldn't. Every once in a great terrible, while you would find a pet mangled in that horrible way, people learn to live with it. The way you live with any danger you can't do anything about. I went off to university in 2011. I moved to Vancouver after graduation and started a whole different life. The yowler became one of those weird childhood memories that doesn't seem real anymore. Did we really just accept that something was stalking our neighborhood? Did I really hear something drop from that tree? Sometimes I wondered if we'd all just spooked each other, turned some sick forest critter into a monster through collective imagination. But then I'd come home for some holiday, and my dad would bring it up casually. I heard the year last week, he would say over dinner. Woke up the whole block. So, it's still out there, still moving around from yard to yard on random nights and yowling. The neighborhood has changed. The trees are much taller than they used to be. And all us kids have grown up and moved away. New different families have moved in, but the yowler remains a constant. And I wonder, what is it? And where in the world did it come from? Why does it stay in our little suburb, prowling the same backyards year after year? I think maybe it has a taste for pets, and I think all us kids back then were scared that it might one day develop a taste for children. What I saw on the way to Montana from Snow's 23. When I was about 15 years old, my brother and I went on a road trip to Montana. For the sake of this story, my brother's name will be John. So, my brother John and I left a friend's house at about 10:30 at night from Oregon to Montana. The trip was pretty normal being late at night. Not a whole lot of traffic, not much happening at all. Just listening to music and hanging out in between Washington and Idaho. Out there where it's kind of desert-like. We stopped so I could use the bathroom to take a whiz. My eyes had adjusted to all the dark surrounding me. I noticed there was a house not far off the freeway. After looking at it for a couple of seconds, I could see that there were 6 doors. I thought to myself, that's weird. As I was looking at this house, I noticed a dark figure now 50 to 70 feet away from the house. I stood there and stared at that figure. It had a dark trench coat with a big brim hat. He also had one of those beaks like they had in the Black Plague. At this point, I decided to jump in the car and get back out of there. I jumped in and told my brother we had to go, and we left. He asked me why I flipped out like that. And when I told him what I saw, he said that he didn't see a house when we stopped. As I thought about it more, he was right. The moment we stopped, I didn't see a house there. So, where did the house come from if it just appeared afterward? After we made it to our friend's house in Montana, we kind of joked about it and talked a little more about what we saw. We exchanged stories of weird stuff we've seen with our friend from Montana. On the way back to Oregon on the same stretch of road, we looked for the house or any building really that might match what we'd seen. But there was no building for about a 10-mile stretch on that side of the road. I'm not sure exactly what I saw or who that person was, but I do know it was very strange. On another occasion, I saw something weird one night when sitting in bed. My brother and I shared a room back then. It was maybe 10 by 20 feet if you were looking in the doorway into our room. The door was on the long side of the wall, looking straight forward to my brother's bed. My brother's bed ran parallel to the other long wall, and my bed was towards the foot of his bed, running along the short side wall farthest from the door. It was about 11:30, and I was up scrolling through YouTube and watching car videos. In the corner of my eye, I saw something move. When I looked over, all I saw were two dark hands on the side of the door frame. When I looked away at the wall, I could see in my peripheral vision this tall figure with bunny-like ears and a creepy white smile. When I looked back towards it, the figure quickly ducked back behind the wall. After a while of this game of peekaboo, I finally just ignored it. I went back to just looking at YouTube, and it kept looking at me. Finally, I just got out of bed with a flashlight and walked over to where it was and peered around the corner. Of course, I didn't see anyone there. When I got back in bed once again, the dark figure began to lean around the door frame, but suddenly this time it stood fully in the door. When I looked, it was like a demon. Jagged teeth, an eerie grin, big bunny-like ears. Our household is a religious household. So, after seeing something like this, I decided to put on some Christian music and read some Bible passages. After about 15 minutes of that, the figure was gone, and I didn't see it afterwards. The Shadow from Shadow 98. The Shadow from Shadow 98. For a bit of backstory, I grew up Christian and still consider myself a Christian. My experience with what I call the shadow has made me more faithful. I don't know what my connection to the supernatural is, but it's like I'm some sort of beacon for the strange and unusual. There's a church in my hometown in the panhandle of Florida, which happened to be the first place I entered when I came home from the hospital after 3 days old. It was also St. Michael the Archangel's feast day. But that same church when I was about 6 years old, I always felt something eerie about it and learned about the devil early on. There was this office with a few steps that I decided to explore in the dark. And all I can remember is that I wasn't alone. Whatever was in there was cold and shadow-like. Since that day, it's as if it left a mark on me, opening my awareness to the strange and unusual around me. Growing up, I was a weird child, seeing what I believed were spirits that others could not see. But then it suddenly stopped until I reached puberty later than my fellow peers. It was about my junior year of high school when I remembered the strange and unusual experiences started to happen again. One day, there was this creepy guy. He was harassing fellow classmates in a gym class. A fight broke out, and I can remember everything that happened, though I don't recall how the fight ended. I remember seeing this shadowy figure around lunchtime. That following year was when I had my first dream about descending into hell in a burning church. The same shadowy figure was there that I had felt at the church. Fast forward to the fall semester of 2018. I was a second-year college student. We had a hurricane that semester that wiped out an entire town aside from one house. Around the same time, my dad was out of town, and I remember waking up in the middle of the night to go get a drink. I made sure not to leave my light on because I knew it irritated my mom and she would complain. She always had trouble getting my little brother to bed and didn't want me to ruin it. A few minutes later, my mom angrily calls out that I had left the light on. I was thinking, what? So, I went to check, and right there standing in the hallway as I rounded the corner was a shadow figure. It had a hood on and was all black. It startled me, but it vanished within a second. Creepily, later that same night, when I got up again to go to the bathroom, I saw the shadow again. It floated into my sister's room, and I didn't see it again after that. After the hurricane, I decided to try and figure out if there was any connection to the supernatural there. This guy from college told me that he and his friends were messing with the Ouija board, and they claimed to have accidentally summoned a demon. I remember doing extensive research on the FA to try and figure out if there was a connection to that. I'm adopted, and I did a 23andMe test, and found out I'm connected to some very strange people that have connections and folklore related to the supernatural. Whenever it's super quiet, I swear the connection gets stronger. One time in the shower, I remember hearing ethereal music and the words, "Return to us," in a whisper. Not too long after that, the shadow figure came back. I was awake and couldn't move. And I saw it, and I remember how skeletal it looked. It spoke a strange message to me, one which I later Googled, and I found stuff about the demon pawn who was considered Lucifer's most loyal. Creepy stuff. COVID-19 hit, and I was either at home doing my Zoom classes or when we were able to go back to school, I was there wearing a mask abiding by school policies. Nothing strange happened again until a fire broke out near some woods back in 2022. I was substitute teaching at the time while in grad school. Right before the fire broke out, this strange warmness wrapped itself around me, and I felt instantly completely drained, like totally exhausted. Not sure why. It didn't really make any sense. It was like this on and off switch with the supernatural because my next experience with the shadow didn't start again until late 2024 and early 2025, and that warmness seems to come over me. The road into darkness from Old School Cook. The road into darkness from Old School Cook. It was the fall of 1994. I had just graduated from Washington State University, a research college tucked into the rolling hills of the Palouse region in eastern Washington. That part of the state is all farmland. Endless golden waves of wheat and barley stretching across rolling hills and open prairies where the dirt roads seem to go on forever. It's the kind of place where the sky feels just a little bit bigger. As a graduation gift to myself, I bought a brand new Jeep Wrangler. It was the perfect ride for someone like me who spent nearly every free moment out in the wild. I would be camping or hunting or going off-road. If there was a trail or dirt road, I was on it. Out there, you could really breathe. It was quiet and free and peaceful. That fall, my dad, a Navy vet with more than 20 years of service, made plans to meet up with me for a deer hunting trip. Our destination, a forested region north of Spokane, about 3 hours away. He came over from Seattle, and we spent the night before the trip going over topography maps and laying out our plan. We hit the sack early, planning to hit the road by 2 a.m., hoping to reach our campsite before sunrise. And we did. By 2 a.m. sharp, we were on the road. My Jeep was packed, gassed up, and rolling north on a two-lane highway that paralleled a train track, cutting through more wheat fields and the occasional sleepy farming town. That night, the only things keeping us company were a few rogue deer and the glow of the Jeep's headlights, slicing through the darkness. We were about 45 minutes in. I was behind the wheel, and my dad was fiddling with the AM radio, seeing if he could pick up anything this far out in the middle of nowhere. Eventually, we started to approach one of those tiny farming communities, maybe 5 or 6 houses scattered alongside the road. Most of the homes were on the right side with barns and grain silos on the left next to the tracks. As we got closer, something strange started to happen. This stretch of highway was straight. It had been for a few miles. You could clearly see the line of street lights up ahead, and in the rearview mirror, they faded off behind us. Everything was exactly as it should be. But as we passed the first farmhouse and the speed limit dropped to 25, I glanced in the rear view again and noticed something odd. The street lights behind us were disappearing. Not dimming, not flickering, just going dark one by one like someone was hitting a light switch in reverse coming for us. I kept watching, trying to make sense of it until I finally said to my dad, "Hey, turn around. Look at this." He leaned over and looked behind us. And instantly, he saw it, too. The street lights shutting off one by one, heading straight in our direction. We both went quiet. Then the AM station he'd been tuning into fizzled into static. Next to us, the second farmhouse's lights shut off completely. Porch lights, barn floodlights, all of it. Behind us was nothing but black. And then the Jeep died. Everything died. The headlights blinked out, dashboard lights gone, engine dead. We were just sitting there in total silence with no power, no light, and no explanation. I tried the ignition. Nothing. Not even a click. And up ahead, the lights continued to vanish. Like darkness itself was crawling through the community, swallowing it one building one bulb at a time. My dad and I just stared at each other. Neither of us said a word. I think we were both trying to process the same impossible thought. What the heck was going on? After a few moments, I turned in my seat and looked out the back window. There, off in the distance, was a faint glow. A street light, then another, and another. They were turning back on now, in the same order they'd turned off. The light crept back towards us, house by house, and street light by street light. Soon the farmhouse behind us lit back up. Then the silo. Then the barn. Then the light next to us flickered to life. And finally, the Jeep itself came back to life. The headlights burst on, illuminating the road ahead, and the dash lit up like a Christmas tree. The radio sputtered back into static and then returned to music like it had never stopped playing at all. I tried the ignition again. The Jeep started on the first try, smooth as it had ever been, like nothing happened. But something did happen. Something real. Something my dad and I both saw and both felt. And to this day, we have no idea what caused it. I've never heard of a power outage that rolls through a town like a wave that kills vehicles, too, and silences radios, then just rewinds itself like a tape being played backward. There's no logical explanation, and we've never talked about it much since. But sometimes late at night, I wonder, was this some kind of military test? An electromagnetic weapon trial way out in the middle of nowhere? Or, and I almost hate to say it, was it something else entirely, something not from here? A UFO encounter? I don't know, but I've never driven through that town again. And I don't plan to. The Scarlet Mare's rider from Gelicious, the Scarlet Mars rider from Gelicious. When I was much younger, I used to have visits to my great-grandpa all the time. We had all kinds of fun together, hunting and cooking and the rest of the works. By that time, he was already a century old, that stubborn geyser. He was superstitious and old-fashioned. A fellow of Russian descent with a hankering for all kinds of pre-Soviet Slavic culture and traditions. A trait that he passed down to me and that I carry with me every day. But by far my favorite pastime with him was sitting crisscross on the floor next to him in his stiff recliner chair as the sky turned indigo with twilight outside. And he told me all sorts of stories from his youth. Believe it or not, he was a veteran of World War I and the Russian Civil War, fighting for the Russian Empire and later the White Army before fleeing to the US and settling down. He had all sorts of stories, some scary, some funny, some sad, and some happy. I didn't care. I'd listen to all of them with equal attention, even if he'd told me 1,000 times before. By the time he finally passed on, he told me every single one of his stories 1,001 times over, except for one. There was one story that he told me only once and never again. I remember it as vividly as the sky above me now. I was 15 years old at the time, and I had convinced myself that I wanted to join the army when I graduated high school since I had been doing ROC. Fight the good fight. Protect my country, and so on. All that children's naivety and a little bit more. I visited my great-grandpa with my sister one weekend, and I told him all about how I was going to serve my country. We had a long, stern conversation about the stark realities of war and how when he was a kid like me, he thought the same thing. How he wanted to come home by Christmas, be his hometown's hero. How he regretted every thought of glamour that he ever afforded that terrible conflict. He sat me down the way he always did when he was preparing to tell me a story. And I don't know how to describe it, but his demeanor changed in a way that almost made him seem shaken, scared even. Then he told me, from this point forward, to get the full grandpa's storytelling effect, I'll be telling the story from his point of view. I don't remember exactly what it was he said word for word as it's been decades since he told me, but I will do my best. It was late August when my outfit had met an average-sized party of Hungarian cavalry lancers in northern Galicia. We had a small cavalry quarter accompanying us as well, but it was mainly for transporting artillery pieces and other equipment, not for battle. Our outfit turned into chaos when the Hungarians attacked, and the cavalry on us tried in vain to fend them off. They got massacred, but it gave us just enough time to dig in on a nearby hill with some sandbags and ditches. The Hungarians placed an assault on us as soon as they'd wrapped up our transportation horsemen, but we had superior firepower and the high ground, too. Those Hungarians attacked us until the last, and by the time we'd cut them all down, it was very late in the night. We'd gotten the order to stay as an Austrian regiment had been seen moving east during the cavalry skirmish. At some point, I must have fallen asleep in a hole I'd dug near the foot of the hill for shelter. I remember waking up for some reason early the next morning. It was quiet. There was a fog all around. This was normal for the region as it's a fairly humid part of Europe on account of its proximity to the Carpathians. Despite this, I felt numbingly, overwhelmingly dreadful for no apparent reason. Not the kind of dread you feel when you think someone is watching you, but the kind of dread you feel when you have a gun to the back of your head and you're certain you're about to die. I was petrified with fear of something I did not yet know. I stayed there for a long while, maybe half an hour, before finally mustering up the courage to peek over the top of the hole. And when I did, I was confused at first. Through the fog, I could make out a man on a horse galloping slowly through the field of corpses. I didn't know if he was Russian or Habsburg, and was concerned that he may be in shock as no sane soldier would gallop out in front of an armed outfit while obscured. I couldn't explain it, but I was still absolutely terrified. At first, I figured that it was because I knew this man, whoever he was in danger. But then I focused and I really trained my eyes on the man. And then I noticed a lot of off-putting features. Firstly, the man on the horse he was the horse. His wide, seemingly fit, and towering torso rose from where the head of a horse should be, entirely replacing the neck and head. Secondly, he seemed to have no legs of his own. There was no disconnect from the horse, and I couldn't tell where he ended and where the horse began. Thirdly, and possibly most disturbingly, he had no arms. He had visible broad shoulders, but no limbs protruding from his chest the way a normal man would. Finally, the only notable feature beyond the man's silhouette I could discern was the horse body's fur. It was a dark and crimson red, like dried blood crusted onto every inch of the horse's body. I was frozen in place, just staring at this thing cantering across the battlefield. Its seemingly human head was tilted down as if to stare at the fallen soldiers before it as it passed, like a grim reaper, like a spirit from beyond. Its stealthy hoof-beats echoed in my head, as loud as the gunshots that had preceded its presence. I came to realize that whatever it was that I was watching across the field was not human in the slightest, and most probably was not of this plane of existence. What I was witnessing was something that should not be on this side of the veil. This thing was something that I couldn't entirely comprehend and that I was never supposed to see. Not its presence and not its macabre ceremony. It suddenly stopped parallel to where I was holed up. I was still frozen with fear. Fear that this thing was going to spirit me off to another realm. Out of nowhere, it jerked its body sideways, then adjusted its feet to face the opposite direction of the way it had been traveling. It thundered that way, and its hooves trampled one of the many soldiers on the ground, and it disappeared into the fog. Its hoof beads faded into the distance, and just like that, it was gone. I gained control of my faculties once more and ducked back into my foxhole. My mind was racing, and I frantically began to pray, recanting the Lord's Prayer in tandem with desperate pleas of my own, and afterwards, I began racking my head for stories and rumors that could tell me the origin of this battlefield terror. Even as we were given the order to march north to meet the Austrians at Galicia, I could scarcely rid my brain entirely of the sight I saw. I never saw it again, but I swear I'd hear those hoof-beats in the distance after long violent battles. I'm convinced it was a psycho pump, a spirit to usher or perhaps drag soldiers to wherever they go when battle takes them. Or maybe even the famed second horseman, the horseman of war, storied in the book of Revelations, watching its product unfold. The one thing I'm sure of that I'm absolutely certain of is that it's something I don't want you to meet. It's something I want you to stay far, far away from. By the end of his story, I was terrified. And that did just the trick. Even though he never told me that story again, I stayed away from the military. I quit ROC, college resume be darned. I went to college and got a bachelor's in business administration and management. And I made a life for myself that I'm sure my great-gramp smiles down on. He's been gone for over 24 years now, and I miss him every day. But I'm sure he'd be happy to see the life I've lived. And I'm glad that I heeded his warning about war and the red horse's rider. The Hurricane Hag from Chaparral native. The Hurricane Hag from Chaparral native. August 25, 2017. A hurricane arrived at Corpus Christi, Texas. The evening that it came ashore found me home alone with my dogs as my wife and son left ahead of the storm to ensure that he would make his flight out of Houston planned months in advance. The power went out well before 9 p.m. as I watched from the detached garage side door, wary of the patio tin roof. By 10 p.m., the winds were at 125 miles per hour as shingles and branches flew down the street. At one point, an entire uprooted tree was being pushed down the street by the wind like a giant broom. I quickly downed my third Lanier beer before it had a chance to get warm in the now dark refrigerator. Good thing I planned and had an ice chest with provisions, extra beer. There was very little ambient light from any source. But a ways up the street, I saw a figure walking this way. As they got closer, I saw what looked like a gray robe with a hood, obviously soaked through. I could see the legs and knees walking, but not the face. The figure seemed feminine and curvy. I couldn't see feet, but rainwater was rushing in the street and curbs. I thought maybe she'd been kicked out by an abusive husband or partner. I'd better offer her shelter and some dry clothes. I ran from the garage, through the patio, through the living room to the front door. Took me about 5 seconds max. There was nobody there, not a soul. I grabbed a huge umbrella and looked up and down the street. The drainage gutters were a few houses down. No way she got sucked down. She was just gone. The hairs on my neck stood on end. I ran back inside and hugged my strangely quiet doggies till dawn. All I had was this battery-powered camping lantern that barely threw any light at all. Was it La Llorona, the crying woman? I didn't hear anything but 125 miles per hour wind. South Texas has many legends and tales such as this. Many are rooted in older legends. The story of La Llorona, or the crying woman, comes from the story of the Aztec Indian maiden who consorted with Hernan Cortez and bore him children. Upon learning that she would not be returning to Spain with Cortez, she drowned her children and is doomed now to haunt bodies of water, looking for her drowned children and crying pitifully. She's known in native lore as La Melinda. The woman was a traitor to her people and helped Cortez to slaughter thousands of Aztec people in his quest to claim and conquer the land and its riches. Certainly, La Melinda has enough evil deeds to have earned the curse of haunting waterways forever, searching for drowned children. Imagine what a black heart she had. Hunters in the South Texas brushlands have reported seeing a bright light that jumps miles at a time. The hunters that have seen it land say it's a horrible-looking woman with long teeth and claws bathed all in bright white light. She screams at victims and turns their hair white. My grandfather claimed to have seen it from a distance as it confronted another hunter and that the sound it made was enough to loosen bows. Other cultures call it the will of the wisp. Grandpa just called it Lou, the light. Grandpa and his friends had permission to hunt on the famous King Ranch. This is thousands of acres of most quite trees and cactus, cows and cougars. It is said there are thousands of bodies buried on the King Ranch that will never be found. The ranch was founded on blood, as many Spanish land grantees were killed as enemies after the Alamo, and land was simply taken. There are hundreds of such stories to go with the bodies. The day I saw her from the stranger, the day I saw her from the stranger. I was 13 years old when I had my first paranormal encounter. At that time, my family and I had recently moved into a new house that was located near the metro area of Puerto Rico. The house itself was cozy and much bigger than the one we used to live in, which was definitely what we needed as we are a family of 5. For the first couple of months, things were going pretty well. The new school was nice, the neighborhood seemed peaceful, and we were loving our new home. This all changed one weekend when I woke up early and decided to watch TV in the living room. While I was there, I started to feel cold. Not your typical early morning cold, but more like if you were standing in front of an open fridge cold. For a moment, I thought that one of the bedroom doors was open and the AC air was just spilling into the living room, but all the doors were closed. It really baffled me, but I shrugged it off and kept on watching TV. Then I started feeling like I was being watched. I was the only one in the living room, and we didn't have any pets or anything like that. What creeped me out the most is that the feeling of being watched was coming from above me, like someone was standing behind the chair I was sitting on and looking right down at me. The hairs on my body stood up. Something was very wrong, and I needed to know what it was. So, in a quick, decisive movement, I looked up. Of course, there was nothing there. I was so uneasy and creeped out that I just turned off the TV and went back to my bedroom. A couple of weeks passed by, and I completely forgot all about it. Maybe I was just being paranoid since I was watching horror movies that morning. But that all changed one day when I saw her. It was one late afternoon. I just arrived from school and decided to watch some TV in the living room before doing my homework. Half an hour passed by, and I started to get that uneasy feeling of being watched. The feeling grew stronger and stronger until I couldn't take it anymore, and I decided to see what the heck was looking at me. I went completely pale. There was a girl crouched down right next to me. She had long black hair, enough to completely cover her face. I know it sounds cliché, but that's exactly what I saw. I was breathless, and it felt like time slowed down. She didn't say or do anything. All of a sudden, her head went down out of my sight, and when I took a look, she was gone. I searched behind the sofa and on the sides, and there was no one there. So, like any other 13-year-old boy, I told myself, screw that, and I ran to my bedroom. I never saw her again after that day. But I still experienced the watching and the cold spots a few more times. We moved a couple of years later. Can't remember why, so I deeply apologize for that. When I was in my early 20s, my father and I were sitting at the mall having a conversation about scary movies, especially the ones with paranormal phenomena. During the conversation, I mentioned how the film The Grudge had me all paranoid when I was a teenager, because I felt that an actual ghost that looked like the one from that movie was messing with me in the old house. I laughed, but my father didn't. Instead, he went silent. I looked at him, and my blood went cold. Have you seen her too? I asked. No. I haven't seen her, but I felt her presence before, he explained. He had felt the sudden drops of temperature around the house and the feeling of being watched multiple times. Even worse, one time he felt that someone or something was pulling his blanket out of bed at night. I was shocked. All these years, I thought that those creepy moments were from my overly imaginative mind after watching scary movies for the first time. But they weren't. It was real. After that, my father said something that truly made my head spin. He said that in the previous house we lived in, before moving to the one where I had my paranormal experiences, it also had weird things going on. Doors opening and closing by themselves, and even toy cars moving without any batteries. I went pale. All of this information made me come to a terrifying conclusion, which I pray to God is not true. That being, were we followed by the same spirit or entity that lived in the first house that my family was in? Gone in a Flash from Valen Gemini 1984. Gone in a Flash from Valen Gemini 1984. My grandma was visiting my great-great-grandmother with my mom and my uncle. They were kids at the time. Creepshow was on the TV. My uncle was insisting that he watch it with my grandmother, even though he was scared. At some point, my uncle had used the bathroom, begging my grandmother to go with him so he wouldn't be alone while also trying not to miss the Creepshow movie. In those days, you couldn't just pause your program and come back to it later. You either had to pre-record it or you missed it entirely. My great-great-grandmother and my mom, who was the oldest sibling, were both upstairs in the bedroom. The bedroom window was wide open. What they were doing up there at the time, I'm not sure, but my grandma told me that all of a sudden the entire house shook. Oklahoma doesn't really have earthquakes last time I checked. So this was bizarre. My uncle started to lose it, freaking out as all the pictures hanging on the walls fell off all at once. The windows rattled and the doors slammed shut. My great-great-grandmother saw a U.S. Air Force jet chasing after something in the sky. Something, she said, zipped by at inhuman speed. Almost the speed of light, according to her. That fighter jet had no chance of catching whatever it was. But my great-great-grandmother watched it struggle to keep up. My mother was shaken up as well. The entire incident was bizarre. My grandma ran upstairs to see what in the world had happened. My great-great-grandmother told her the account of what she saw outside the window. Most likely the low-flying jet caused some sort of sonic boom that shook things up in the house and made everything slam down, pictures and decorations falling off the walls. But now that I look back on it, my grandma said that my great-great-grandmother saw the weird alien craft zip by as everything fell off the walls and slammed the door shut before the jet ever tailed by. I've tried to come up with an explanation of my own, but I always turn up empty. We are a logical scientific family who always looks for explanations first before we swear by our experiences. But many of our experiences are unexplainable and downright bizarre. It's like my family has some weird energy attracting these things like a magnet. They've had several encounters with the paranormal and possibly extraterrestrial. This is one out of probably over 20 stories. All of them either bizarre or really creepy. As for what my great-great-grandmother witnessed, perhaps it was some weird government experiment gone wrong. Or maybe it really was some alien spacecraft on the loose. The military desperately going after it to stop whatever threat it might pose. We'll never truly know. No reports were made, and my grandmother didn't tell me about any neighbors experiencing the same thing. But there's no way we were alone on this with how shaken the house was. Maybe back then people just kept to themselves. What a fun episode this was. I wonder if there's a crypt or folklore monster out there that matches the description of the cat monster from the first story. Or perhaps it's a new creature altogether. Good night. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Unexplained Encounters. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. If you've got a scary story of the unexplained and you want to hear it on the show, send it to me at darkstories.org. And if you want to support us, just follow and review Unexplained Encounters on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thank you. Until next time, everyone, stay safe out there and stay creepy because this world is a strange one.